There comes a point in a long marriage when you stop explaining yourself, not because you have given up, not because you no longer care, but because you have said the same thing so many times, in so many different ways, that the words have worn smooth. Like stones in a river, they no longer cut anything. You sit across the table from someone you have known for 30 years, and you eat in silence, and somewhere inside you, something notices that this silence has a different weight now than it did in the beginning. In the beginning, silence between two people felt like possibility, like a held breath before something beautiful. Now it feels like furniture, familiar, necessary, but no longer noticed, and you are not sure exactly when that happened. Lars and Ingrid had been married for 31 years when he first noticed the gap. Not that it was new. He understood that. But something about that particular Tuesday evening, the rain against the kitchen window, the smell of dinner going cold on the stove, the way she sat reading without looking up when he entered the room. Something about all of it made him suddenly, quietly aware. They were two people living in the same house, moving around each other with the practiced ease of long habit, and yet there was a distance between them that had no name, not anger. There was no anger, not resentment exactly, though perhaps traces of it faded by now into something softer, just space, interior space, the kind that opens slowly over years, almost without you noticing, the way a door that is never quite closed eventually drifts open in a draft. Lars was 61. He had retired 8 months earlier from a job he had held for 26 years. He had expected retirement to feel like freedom. Instead, it had felt like a long Sunday afternoon, pleasant in theory, oddly directionless in practice. He had more time now than he had ever had, more time to sit, more time to notice. And what he noticed, sitting in that kitchen, with the rain against the glass and Ingrid turning a page, was that he did not know what she was thinking. He realized, with a quiet kind of shock, that he hadn't known for quite some time. There was a version of Ingrid he held in his mind, a settled, assumed version. The way you assume the shape of a piece of furniture in a room you know well. You stop really seeing it. You know it is there. That is enough. But when had he last looked at her, really looked, and wondered what was moving inside her? He couldn't remember. That was the thing that unsettled him most, not the distance itself, but the fact that it had arrived so quietly, so gradually, that neither of them had stood at the door and watched it come. Ingrid, for her part, had her own interior life that Lars knew very little about. She was 58. She had worked as a nurse for most of their marriage. Long shifts, difficult work, the kind of profession that takes something from you slowly and doesn't always give it back. She had retired the previous spring, 6 months before Lars, and she had spent those 6 months alone in the house in a way she hadn't expected. She had rediscovered the garden. She had started reading again properly. She had walked in the forest behind their house on mornings that were cold enough to see your breath, and she had felt, not happy exactly, but something quieter and perhaps more useful than happiness. She had felt herself, but she hadn't told Lars this, not because she was hiding it. simply because it hadn't come up, because the rhythms of their life together had worn channels over decades, and the things that flowed through those channels were practical things. Dinner. The children, grown now, living their own lives. The car that needed looking at, the neighbor's dog, the small weather of daily life. The deeper things had somehow learned to stay underground. She thought sometimes about a conversation they had had many years ago, driving through the night on a long summer journey. She couldn't remember where they were going, but she remembered the dark road and the radio quiet and how they had talked, really talked, for hours about what they believed in, about what frightened them, about who they thought they might become. She had loved him fiercely on that drive, and she still loved him. She was sure of that. But love, she had come to understand, is not a single thing. It changes shape. It does not always feel the way it once did, and that can be frightening if you expect it to. The love she had for Lars now was quieter, more like the love you feel for a place, your childhood home, a particular stretch of coastline. Something that is simply part of you, not because you are always delighted by it, but because you cannot quite imagine yourself without it. That kind of love is real. It is perhaps even a deeper love than the early, bright, urgent kind. But it is not always enough to bridge the silence at the kitchen table. There is a kind of emotional archaeology that happens in long marriages. You dig occasionally, and you find things you had forgotten were there. Old kindnesses, old wounds, old versions of each other that no longer quite exist. Lars found a photograph once, tucked into a book he was clearing out. They were young in it, early 30s probably, standing somewhere with trees behind them, laughing at something outside the frame. He didn't remember the day, he couldn't place the occasion, but he recognized something in the way they were standing. Close, but not touching. Turned slightly toward each other, as if in the habit of orienting themselves by the other person, the way a plant turns toward light. He looked at that photograph for a long time. He thought about the years between that moment and this one. The way they had moved together through time, through the difficult years with the children, through bereavements, through the slow restructuring of middle age. They had not been unhappy. They had not been. There had been warmth and laughter and long stretches of ordinary contentment. But there had also been, and this was the thing he found hard to hold in his mind, so many things that hadn't been said, so many small withdrawals. Moments when one of them had wanted to reach out and had instead gone quiet. Times when something important had been left at the edge of a sentence, never quite completed. Not because of cruelty, not because of indifference, simply because reaching out is hard. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes. And then one day the silence has a history, and crossing it feels like an enormous thing, and so you don't. This is not a failure, exactly. It is something more ordinary and more human than that. It is what happens when two people try to live together through time. One evening in November, Lars came in from the garden. He had been restacking wood for the coming winter, and found Ingrid sitting at the kitchen table with her hands around a cup of tea, not reading, just sitting. She looked up when he came in. He said, without planning to say it, "Are you all right?" Not in the routine way he usually asked it, not the automatic way that doesn't really expect an answer. There was something different in his voice. She looked at him for a moment, and then she said, "I don't know," which was also different. The honest answer instead of the easy one. They sat together then at the kitchen table with the dark pressing at the windows and the wood stove beginning to warm the room. And they talked, not about anything dramatic, not about their marriage, not about the years, not about what had gone unsaid. They talked about small things, about how the light was already going by 3 o'clock, and how that affected her mood without her quite realizing it, about how he had been feeling restless, unmoored, since retiring, and hadn't known how to name it, about a bird she had been watching in the garden, a lone fieldfare that came every morning to the old apple tree. It was not a great reconciliation. It was not the start of some transformation. It was simply two people sitting in a kitchen in November, being honest with each other in a small and careful way. But it was something. And when they went to bed that night, Lars lay for a while in the dark, listening to Ingrid's breathing, and he felt not happiness exactly, but something that sat alongside it, something that recognized itself. There is a thought that stays with me when I think about long marriages, long relationships, long lives lived in close proximity to another person. It is this: we imagine love as something that should always feel present, as something we should always be able to find if we look. But love in long life is not like that. It is not always visible. It is more like the foundation of a house. You are rarely aware of it until something shifts, and then you understand how much was resting on it all along. An emotional distance in marriage, the kind that builds quietly over years, is not always a sign that something has died. Sometimes it is simply a sign that something has changed shape, that it has moved from one form to another. From the loud and urgent to the quiet and steady. The question is not always, how do we go back? Sometimes the question is, what is actually here if we look at it honestly? That is harder, because it requires you to stop expecting what was and to sit with what is. Not every marriage that grows quiet has grown cold. Some silences are not absences. Some are simply the sound of two people who have been through many years together and have run out of the need to perform and are now, for better and for worse, simply present to each other. That is not nothing. It may, in fact, be something very few people ever find. The winter that followed was long. Lars and Ingrid moved through it the way they had moved through many winters before, with wood smoke and routines and the particular rhythm of two lives fitted around each other over decades. Not everything changed. The silence at the dinner table was still there most evenings. There were still days when he felt far from her, and days when she felt alone in a room they shared. But there were also mornings, more of them now, when one of them would say something small and true, and the other would listen. And for a moment, the distance between them would be simply that, a distance, with a possible crossing. I think that is what long love looks like when you see it clearly. Not a continuous closeness, not the early warmth, sustained and bright, but the willingness to come back again and again, to sit at the table and ask, and mean, are you all right? And to be willing, sometimes, to answer honestly, I don't know. Let me tell you what I've been thinking. There is a kind of peace in that, a quiet one, not the peace of resolution, but the peace of two people who have chosen, one more time, not to let the silence have the last word. If this quiet moment resonated with you, you are always welcome here. This channel was created for slow reflections, honest emotions, and the thoughts many people carry silently through life. If you'd like more stories like this, you can gently subscribe and return whenever you need a peaceful place to think, feel, or simply listen. Thank you for spending this moment here tonight. Take care of yourself and rest well.